How's it going, guys? I'm Jeff.
I'm Alyssa.
And welcome back to the Real Life Podcast, where we talk about faith, culture, and answer your questions. Today, I want to zoom in on a question or a topic that we talk about a lot in bits and pieces, but I want to kind of dedicate an episode to that. And it's particularly because it's on my mind fresh. If you are a homeroom member, this was the topic for March, and that is living as a family team, or if you're only married, living as a team in your marriage, and why this is deeply critically important and the design of Scripture, but yet not the Western individualized design. And so there is a competing ideal in our culture, and it is the team versus the individual. Well, actually, I think that's we'll get into in a second. I don't think they compete. I think they actually go hand in hand when you're living in them. So yeah, living as a family team, living as a married team. I want to talk about that. And I guess we can start with one particular kind of pushback we get a lot in the family teams venture. And that is people tend to think that kind of have this question or this pushback, and it ranges from genuinely curious to actually like, this is why they disagree strongly. And that's that kind of like, you're going to bury the individual type of thing like that, like, oh, you're going to just bulldoze the individuals. What about their talents and their giftings? It's funny because it's kind of revealing the cards, because again, the American ideal is that the individual is limitless, that there's no limits placed on an individual. That is what our culture desires. That's our highest value, and that's how and why we built the country, how we built it, and why we have technology the way we have it, and why we have consumer goods like the way we have it, because we want to be limitless. So the minute you start putting limits on the individual, then it becomes it's just interesting. But I think sometimes we reveal in that question of like, basically, what do you do when you feel like you want to live in the family team, but then you're scared to dampen the individual or kind of make them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where I'm trying to think of another way to phrase it, but I think that kind of makes sense. And I think
I think because, sorry.
Go ahead.
Family team, we don't really hear that phrase a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, we've talked about this before. It's like, hey, let's have a family, and it's a nest, and then we send them off and they go do their individual things. And we want to provide, while they're in our nest, we want to provide them with all the opportunities to grow and become the best that they can be, so that they can be successful, or maybe not successful, but just like living in their callings or their passions. And so we send them out, and we're kind of offering something, wanting to shift it a little bit and say like, hey, family is a team. The Lord has given you each member of your team for a reason. You needed them. Your calling is together. It's not all these individual callings. It's like, hey, we needed these giftings and whatever it is to have this calling together. And so we're on mission together. And so what does that look like? And I think a lot of times that can be really mind-blowing, because a lot of us didn't grow up hearing that. Yeah. And whether we were taught family or not taught family, we have these
preconceived ideals.
Yes, thank you. And so I think that's what we're kind of rubbing up against, maybe.
Totally. And so guys, and it's funny too, because I think sometimes when people kind of spit this back out to us of like, hey, like, oh, that's dangerous or that's problematic because it's just going to quash the individual and they won't have any space to flourish or be creative or do what they like or do what they're talented at. And I always go like, you're not talking about family team right there. You're talking about fascism. Like, you're talking about nationalism from like World War II and other dictatorships. Like, those are miles apart is what I'm trying to say. Like Hitler and Mussolini actually had the view that the nation was more important than the individual. And they were willing to then bulldoze and ultimately kill people because of it. So I'm like, okay, that's brutal dictatorship, fascism, nationalism, and a couple other kind of versions of belief. And so here's another way to put it. There's a huge difference between like Mussolini's Italy and the Golden State Warriors. Okay? Like, this one is brutal and not like, that's not a team. That's like a whole belief system about like actually like crushing the individual.
Yeah.
And Golden State Warriors is a team. And so like, I just think it's funny. I think we kind of mix the metaphors there and mix the things of get the target wrong. And so yeah. I think the sports language is probably where you see the best helpful team dynamic that you can kind of then start unpacking every single truth. So here's another thing that's kind of food for thought that I think is helpful to us is, do we really believe, like we'll put our cards on the table. I believe, and we believe, that when you're living in a team mentality, then you actually flourish more as an individual. They're not competing. Right. They're not competing. When you live as a team, then you're called up into a greater, bigger story, And I believe you can actually flourish more as an individual and actually just accomplish more because you're getting the resources and the talent and the skill and the pedestal of the team.
Yeah,
right?
that's so good.
Like Steph Curry is Steph Curry because of his team. LeBron is LeBron because of his team. Like these are not individual sports. And so they become more individualized and iconic based upon their team. When their team succeeds, when the team wins championships. So I just think that's an interesting thing to start. Like, here's another way to put it too. Like, so many times we kind of say, and in the West, we really believe and show our cards that we want the individual to be kind of raised up more or give them every opportunity or, let them kind of not. Basically, we're so scared of squashing them that we basically say, like, you do whatever you want. Like, you're the most important thing, not the team. The individual is more important than the team. Whatever you want, whenever you want, whatever feels good, do it. Now, here's a question. Have you ever known any sports team to have that ideal that wasn't just poison? Like literal poison. Like I'm playing on sports teams for 17 years of my life. Any team where there's an individual on the team who gives off the aura and the spirit and the demeanor that he is more important than the actual team, any coach, any person knows that's actual poison. That's like toxic to the team, right? Tom Brady and some of these other iconic players, they flourish because they actually, support their team, uplift their team, thank their team. No, they can't do it alone. So, I mean, we all know those people where it's kind of like they're trying to get their individual accomplishments on the team. And that's the highest ideal to them. And they don't actually play like a team or have a team mentality. And that's just like poison. Yeah. And so I think we need to realize like how poisonous that is to a family. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, I think a lot of times we fight against the team mentality because a lot of times our coaches are missing.
Yes.
And so,
well, it's Lord of the Flies vibe. It's like, no, it is that like when
like
there's not,
if there's no dad at home, if he's not involved, if he's more consumed with building his business than building his family, then it can be really hard to have a team mentality because it feels like, well, if he's an individual, then we can all be individuals. Oof. Or there's not that coach to like really pull the team together, and the mom can only do so much. And so I think that and obviously single mom, that's a totally different thing, but within like if there's a mom and dad at home but the coach is gone a lot, that can make it really hard to be a team.
That's so good. I loved what you said there, that it all trickles down from the father, right? That the father sets the like he's showing with the story he's living that like I'm an individual. It's about my work accomplishments. It's about me sacrificing sacrificing the team on behalf of what I want.
Right.
Not saying that work's bad. We all work, right? But you know what I'm saying? Like the kind of the person who sacrifices his family for work.
I think what we talk about in family teams is like we need to give a vision for the men in our culture that men are created to build. Yeah. They want to build something, but instead of having the vision to build a legacy and to build a family, they think that the answer is work. So they build a business, they build whatever for their. You can say this so much better than me, but they spend all their time building something, whether it's sports or a hobby or whatever, instead of like, oh, God has given me a family to build into and to create a crazy, awesome team and to have a legacy. And so then when they shift to that, then the family really flourishes.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly true. I think that's so true that it starts with the dad. There's a trickle down effect. So dads, if you're listening, I would just encourage you, are you exhibiting a team mentality to your family? Because I think also it's really bad to demand a team mentality from your kids. When coaches, it's the opposite. The coaches that got the most out of me and coaches that got, I know, the most out of my friends were ones who kind of, you could tell they were giving their all. So then you kind of then wanted to, surrender your all. Does that make sense?
Well, you just knew that you were like really loved, wanted. Yeah. They pursued you. They poured into you.
Well, I feel like it's a metaphor with Jesus too, guys, that like he doesn't force us to obedience. He goes so far first, meaning he pursues, he dies, he loves, he resurrects, and then that action then woos you to like an action. And I think that's similar with like a father or a mother, but the coaches and to their kids is that like when you are, and again with coaches with sports teams, man, it's so true that when I could tell that they were sacrificing, when I could tell that they were getting up early and thinking about me, when I could tell they were trying to, they were angsty and struggling over a problem I was having because they took it on as their own problem. man, that makes me want to just bend over backwards for them. And I think that's so true with parents, that we have to continually show that as coaches, we're not just demanding this from our kids, but like we're teaching our kids how to sacrifice first. We're teaching our kids how to love first. We're teaching our kids how to forgive first. And that then by example, and obviously calling that out in teaching, that is what usually woos and kind of solidifies a lot of those behaviors. Because you're right. Sometimes we ask this of our kids when like the parent isn't doing it first.
Right.
And that'll never go well. And so I think, the coaching mentality is really helpful with the team of like, we are coaches and coaches have a vision for the team, right? Like no team would ever win if the coach just shows up and says, I don't know what we're doing today. The team would say, oh, that's like your responsibility, right? So again, that's an encouragement to moms and dads out there. Like, are you coming to play every day? Are you coming with a vision for your team? Do you have the whiteboard out because they're looking for a coach? And the cool part is there's so much joy stepping into a family coach position, and that God has equipped you for your own kids. You're not ill-equipped. You have it. You have what it takes. You are incredible and gifted and talented and exactly what your kids need. It's just about activating and tapping into all that. So I think that's a first good start, I guess. And then I want to kind of turn and talk practicals. How do we do this then? How do we kind of really try to make sure we're pushing against the individual and embracing a team mentality, but make sure I also can reiterate, and you guys heard that, I don't believe they're competing ideals. I believe that that when the team is the most important thing, then you get the individual. And if it's living in God's design and you guys all have a bigger mission, a bigger story, then the individual will flourish and succeed better and actually willingly surrender their obedience, not be forced. I think that's kind of the magic dynamic. And and again, I've played on plenty of sports teams that's the magic dynamic. Those are the teams that win championships, is that they're all going, above and beyond. They're all sacrificing for each other. And there's a sweat equity of like, we're in the trenches together.
I just keep getting this picture of Remember the Titans.
Or I was going to say like Coach Carter. Yeah,
yes,
Coach Carter,
like
Remember the Titans.
all the movies.
Yeah, there's so many good coaching movies, man. And like, that is a family.
Yeah.
Because a family rallies. A family sticks together in the hard times.
Yeah.
They don't splinter. They don't divide, because if it's about individual accomplishments, then you have no power to stick together when it goes bad. Right? It's only teams that have a strong team that can walk through really difficult stuff. So,
and I think when you are a strong team, I just think, wow, I feel like the kids feel so safe and secure because they know they're not alone. They don't have to figure things out. They don't have to go to all their friends to find all this advice. It's like they have this team, and that they can go, you know what I mean? It's like this strong bond with each other.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways to get practical, guys. I would say one way that we try to do this, and by the way, if you're still listening and you're not a family or a marriage, you're a single college student, you're a young professional, please know too, that actually when we talk about this, in the back of my mind, it's actually, I feel like we're talking to everyone still. Because even though you're maybe a single college student or a young professional or an older single person or whatever, you are in a family.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no one who is not born into like you're born into a family. So just because you might not be the mom and the dad over like children, we're all in this family dynamic and we're all part of a team. No one's called to walk individually on some sense. And I actually think adult kids, like some of the best family teams I've ever seen, are the ones that are comprised of like multi-generations with adult kids who maybe they don't have kids and maybe they do and this side over here does. Just kind of a combination of all the different types of walks of life. I think those are brilliant teams and really world impacting teams. So the first thing I would say is you have to start with language. What's really interesting when you start digging into any successful team, coaching, baseball, football, basketball, national championship teams, the Golden State Warriors, etc., they all have a very particular language and they all share that language. There's very specific words that's kind of insider language. So there's two different versions to this. One is you have to have insider language, which another way is put, like you have to have code language for your team. That does something to kind of bolster like, oh, this is a special group that not everyone is allowed in, right? Not like an exclusivity way of like, oh, we judge people, but just like, oh, this is a special cool, like whether it's a secret handshake, but like with language, right? So kind of like that. Intimate insider language, but then also with language of making sure your language in general points towards teamhood, not individuality. And so it sounds so tiny, guys, but oh man, does it work? Like even the tiniest thing where I talked about this on Instagram a couple weeks ago, where when we travel, it used to be like, oh, daddy's going to speak. Okay, we don't say that anymore. Now it's like, maybe dad's going to speak, but our team is sending out daddy to speak. Our family is called to where daddy's going. He's just the talking head to go do it. Yeah. He's the ambassador on behalf of the Bethke team, not daddy's going and doing this thing that no one else cares about or is a part of. So like that's all that was a language shift. Immediately we saw results from that. Yeah. Immediately it felt different. Immediately we felt like we lived more in the design of what we're called to do. So that's crazy that a language difference can have such ramifications. The next one is like, make sure you're saying like cultivate, especially with toddlers, like cultivate that team. Like whenever there's a trouble or whenever there's toughness, or discipline or anything, we always pull out the team language of like Kinsley's the leader and the captain of the team, we say. So I say like, hey, that's not the team need, like the phrase I find myself saying a lot is the team needs you. Like we actually need you, Kinsley. We need you. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be frustrated, but this team needs you right now. And specifically, if it's a discipline or a fight or something, it's like your brother needs you. You're a leader over him and you can show him love. You can show him an example since he's younger and he hasn't learned it yet. And he's going to learn it through you. So this team needs you. So stuff like that. I don't know. Do you got anything on that and the language or thoughts or how you kind of cultivate that or do that as a mom?
No. I'm just sitting here soaking it all up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so good.
I mean, the captain language is huge. Like we use that. The firstborn, I think, is easier to kind of get language for like role, but then you have to then process the middle child, younger kids, etc. But everyone has a role. And I think not trying to buck the kids' roles, but actually getting them to live in it, again, is for their design. Like the worst thing you can do for a team is tell everyone on the team they're the quarterback. Like that's weird. That's weird. No, that you can't play a game that way. So then this really comes down to spirit-ledness, because this is where you want to make sure that every kid is you're telling every single kid you are vital and necessary to this mission. And God put you in this family because we need you. We could not accomplish where God is taking us without you. And that's every single kid. And you can use kind of language for that. You can kind of call that out in them. And like I mentioned in a previous episode with Cannon right now as the middle child, I feel like he's the emotional bridge between the children right now. And so I call that out in him and I say that to him. And he's so sensitive and kind and sweet. I want to make sure, especially as a boy, that he doesn't lose that. So I call that out and I encourage that in him. And so, yeah, language is like step one before you start getting into like activities and stuff. But anything else you want to add there?
Sorry, guys, I don't have a lot.
Okay,
it's just so good. I'm taking it in.
So then I think the
I think the one thing I would add to that is I think
there we go.
Growing up as an only child, I just assume like, oh, with kids everything should be fair. It should all be on the playing field. I'm like so scared. I was so scared that the middle child would be the middle child. You've heard that before. But I think recently I've just had this mind shift of no, the Lord specifically has each child in their whatever you call it, position.
Yeah, roles,
like
birth order, rank.
Like there is something to that in the Bible, and the Old Testament is very clear. Like
the birth order matters.
Birth order matters. And I think American culture, we want to buck that. And so just like stepping into it and saying, oh, you're the oldest, so you have more responsibility, but we're going to bless you. You're the middle child. Maybe you're the bridge gapper, whatever, the youngest child, you bring so much joy, whatever it may be, to speak those things over them and not resent it. And I think if you do that, then the kids don't resent it either, and they can find a role and a purpose as their role. Like they're not. Does that make sense? And so for me, that's really a new shift for me, and I think it's been really monumental in our family. I can already see the difference in our kids and training sis to be the leader, but having a servant's heart as the leader. And there's responsibility there. Just those things I think are really important. And so to not be fearful of instilling that in your kids. It doesn't have to be fair. Like God didn't make it fair. And there's a reason why they are the second child or the third or the fourth. And so leaning into that. And and I think what you're saying, when you put it to a team mentality, when it's like, oh, you're the quarterback, you're the defense, you're the Marshawn Lynch, you're the Russell Wilson, all these things, like they're all really important. It's just you have different roles to fulfill and to find value in that.
Yeah. And guys, here's where that can be problematic, is if as parents, we're not deeply pushing into the Lord for him to give us a picture for our children of his heart. So that goes really well. And it's in God's design when you are seeking the heart of God on behalf of your children on who are they? Who are they? It goes bad when we are lazy and we just kind of don't do anything. Does that make sense? Like when we don't pursue, so I think whenever people have those pictures of like someone getting overlooked or something like that, that's because usually those parents weren't seeking the heart of God on behalf of that child. And who is that child? The team needs that child. And so you're kind of like seeking God to give you the word and the roles in the picture for your family. And then trusting that if that's in his design and you've heard his voice, then that is for joy and for blessing for everyone. So language is huge, guys. And that's kind of comes even then with birth order and stuff like that. Birth order is a fascinating thing. We're like one of the only cultures that literally doesn't care. Like every culture in all of human history, and the East still does. certainly care about birth order. We weirdly, again, don't want to put limits on anyone's and start talking about birth order puts limits on someone because, well, that means we kind of say in our culture, you can be whatever you want and do whatever you want. Well, in some sense, sure. And I think that's actually our blessing in the West is that we kind of have told people that, and that's led to a lot of blessing. But like at the same time, like we're kind of like almost lying to our kids, because when you have one child, that is a fundamental different team and relationship with the parent than when you have 5. Meaning like when the 5th child is 2 years old versus when the first child is 2 years old, that's a very radically different experience as a 2-year-old. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so to try to equalize that and flatten that is just almost lying, in my opinion. And we actually do when we try to lean into the fairness and lean into, it's like, it's not telling the truth. Like that, it's not fair. Like this, you cannot ever live the experience of your oldest sibling because you have 5 siblings. They didn't when they were 2. You just can't, it can't happen. We can't replicate that. I'm sorry. So that's a huge part. Okay. So then another way we do, I think it gets down to is like, then again, the sports analogy is really helpful of like practices, games, meetings, debriefs, celebrations, all these different things. You kind of have to think in that realm of like what do good teams do? They do all of those. Too much practice, no celebration leads to burnout. Too much practice, no games leads to no purpose. Only celebration, but no practice or games feels like there's not enough work or mission. So I think those are really good places to start of like, what would be a practice to your family team and what would be a game? I think I can't answer that because I feel like that's a little bit spirit-led and different, but it kind of gets into the mission of your family that I think is a really fun conversation to have. Well, first of all, say, what's your game? What's the mission maybe in this season? So for us, I'll give you ours. And ours with toddlers, I don't feel like this is go change the world. I don't feel like the mission is go change the world, go do X, Y, and Z. I feel like our mission currently is to equip and encourage and resource people as family teams and on the internet. But then locally, I would say,
sorry, pinky down.
I would say similarly, that's the mission, but also on top of that, like even more localized, I would say like we really care about hospitality. I feel like that's actually part of our mission, to have people over for dinner, to be engaged in like kind of relationships and rhythms in the home with other people. So we want to make sure that our family is set up for that mission, meaning that when we have people over for dinner, it's just not chaos with our kids running around doing X, Y, and Z. Now, of course, they're 4 and 2, so there's a level of that. That's right. True. But like it's just a reverse engineering, guys. Like we believe that's a hard part of our mission. So then we actually probably train at the table more than most people I know because the table is our mission field, right? So like that's just an easy example, and there's more of those. But like we take the eating time really serious, so that as a practice, so that then when we get to the game, like we just can play the game. Does that make sense? And that they're trained well for that, and that we're trained well for that. So, and we can be a team, and it's so fun to already train Sis to kind of like, and she loves it because she's got such a servant's heart to clean up the dishes, to help the team in that way. You okay, girl? What do you want to say there? We got Loose the Goose.
Like speaking of the table.
I know. She's like, I'm hungry. Okay, guys, we might have to cut this one a few minutes short. But yeah, that's what I would say. Would you add anything else to that?
No.
She's trying to multitask, guys, so I don't think her brain's all there right now with like baby and...
Yeah, since I've been pregnant, it hasn't been all there. But
pregnant? That's like a year ago.
Exactly. Any mamas out there with me?
Oh, no, you're all there. You're all there. Okay, what was I going to say? So yeah, I think, I guess we'll kind of end to this. I'm sorry, guys, just because I know we don't have time.
Add with some encouragement?
I feel like this whole episode's been encouraging.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I guess we differ on what's encouraging and what's not.
Just eightness,
Here's what I'll say, guys. Like, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're old, or whether you're young, whether you have kids, or whether you don't have kids, you're part of a family team somehow, either people above you, below you, or like, horizontally from you. And so I would say, man, it's really encouraging to realize that God's design is to connect us more to people and make us more dependent on people than we like to think in the West. Like it comes down to what you think the true vision is for human flourishing. Do you really think the West's version of the true vision for human flourishing is take away all your limits so that you can access all the benefits of life individually? That's the vision of human flourishing in the West. If only we can get to a place where there's no more friction or limits, then we will finally be happy and find joy and flourish. God's design is almost, not that we would have a ton of limits, but it's almost counterculture and opposite of that in the sense of you will find joy and flourishing not when you submit to Jesus or when you submit to Jesus, but also when you submit to each other. There's that language is all over the New Testament that when we live in submission to each other. And then we believe that limit, that difficulty of human relationships, that process actually is what it means to be human and what it means to follow Jesus in those teams, whether as the family of God, the big capital F family, the church, or in our micro families where we live or where our parents live or where we raise our kids. So, and what's cool is those are competing ideas, guys. The West's version of individuality versus individuality found in submission to another in a team. And I think the cool part is God's idea wins. It wins out, meaning like when you live in that, you start to see the feedback loop of, oh, this is harder, and this is more difficult, but it's way more enriching. It's way more beautiful. It's way more fun. It's way more life-giving. So yeah, would you kind of close with anything or add anything or drop a bomb or...
Sorry, guys.
That'll be the fourth time I've said pass it to you. Nah, I'm good. Just nope. You drop an encouragement bomb.
I don't know. I think what you said was just so good.
Okay. All right, guys. This is a short one. Lucy's signing off. Real life podcast here.
I know.
Hey, we love you guys. We'll talk to you next week.